Welcome, friends, to another edition of Ask Prof Wolff. It's a program we bring to you from Democracy at Work every other week. It's an opportunity for us to interact with you, for you to pose questions, and for us to offer answers in the hope that we can all learn from each other and build the awareness that this country badly needs, to say the least. I'm very pleased and proud to be part of this. I appreciate enormously the many questions that you have sent in, and I want to urge you to continue to do that. I can assure you we look at and read every single one. But you do please have to understand that we cannot answer them all, and so we have to pick. And here's how we do it each time. We take two questions that have come in since the last live stream. And we begin by my telling you what those two questions are and offering an answer. After that, it's up to you. You can send in questions, live questions, and we will select and respond to them for the entirety of the rest of this program. So let's begin. The first question we selected comes from, and I hope I pronounced the name correctly, Anatoly. Anatoly clearly has a problem of a variable rate mortgage. Here's what that means: that you've borrowed money to buy your home, but you have a variable interest rate. In other words, how much money you have to send in every month to hold on to your home depends not only on the amount of money you borrowed to buy it, but on the interest rate. If interest rates go up, you've got to pay more. And if interest rates go down, you get to pay less. It's a bit of a gamble to take a mortgage like that, but often it's the only one people can afford. And Anatoly is stuck at a time of high interest rates, higher than they used to be by a lot, and Anatoly therefore has to make much larger mortgage payments. That really hurts. It's a way that the inflation comes and hits you right where you live. And Anatoly then asks the logical question: are the measures taken by the Federal Reserve in the United States and by the Bank of Canada — I suspect Anatoly is probably Canadian — are those steps helpful? Are they irrelevant? What do I have to say about the high interest rates that have been levied in the United States, Canada, and many other parts of the world, not all of them, but many of them, over the last 2 to 3 years? Okay, wonderful question. Here comes the answer. They're not particularly helpful, and by that I mean they haven't brought the inflation down to where it is 0 or 1% or even the 2%, which they say are their targets. It's now double that, close to 4%. So they haven't succeeded very well. But that's not the most important point. The most important point is that raising interest rates is not the only way to deal with an inflation if you really want to. And it has the very big drawback, raising interest rates, that it hurts small businesses much more than big businesses, poor people much more than rich people. Why? Well, think for a moment. If interest rates are higher, that's going to be harder the less money you have, and be less of a problem the more money you have. It goes for individuals, and it goes for businesses. So to deal with an inflation by raising interest rates is right off the bat discriminatory. It's better for rich people than it is for poor, which probably won't surprise you. But here's what's important. There are other ways. Not only are there other ways, but countries around the world, including the United States, have used those other ways, and I want to talk to you about that briefly. The first one is the one that was used here in the United States by President Richard Nixon back in August of 1971, 50 years ago. We had a really bad inflation then, and President Nixon went on the radio and the TV, and he said to the American people, "We have a terrible inflation. We're going to do something about it." Did he raise interest rates? No. Here's what he did instead. He declared a wage price freeze. That's what it's called. He announced publicly that as of tomorrow morning, the next day after his speech, any business that raised the price of anything that it produced, any good, any service, the police would come and arrest you for violating the president's order. Any worker or union that demanded higher wages, same thing. Prices were frozen. Wages were frozen. You were not allowed to raise them. All that an inflation ever was or is raising prices. By a wage price freeze, President Nixon stopped the whole process dead in its tracks. So is that an alternative? Yes. But it's one that doesn't discriminate against poor and small businesses in favor of the rich and big businesses, and that's probably why the Federal Reserve didn't discuss it. The president didn't bring it up. There was no debate in Congress or anywhere else about it. It's as if it never happened, as if we all suffered some sort of collective amnesia about this. But I didn't make it up. Look it up. You'll learn all about it. And here's a second way to deal with an inflation. You say that we're not going to use the market system anymore to buy and sell goods and services. We're going to say to the stores of America, you don't sell butter, sugar, gallons of gas, meat, all the basics of life. You're not going to do that anymore for money at any price. You can raise the price, you lower the price, we don't care, because that's not how people are going to buy those things anymore. President Franklin Roosevelt, United States, 1940s, during the war, handed out ration cards to the American people. And when you wanted to buy something, you paid for it with a ration ticket that you tore out of your ration card or your ration booklet. That way, the price was fixed. 1 ticket, quart of milk. 2 tickets, gallon of gas, whatever. And that way the government made sure no more rising prices that discriminate against the poor and the middle classes and favor the rich. So the answer to your question is the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Canada could have and should have discussed, admitted, debated, and let the people participate in deciding what measure to use rather than imposing one, which is what they did, that discriminates clearly in a class-biased way. The next question that came in over the last couple of weeks that we selected comes from James. James asks a question that many of you have asked about the Social Security system here in the United States. And James's particular question is, why is there a cap of $168,000 per year income used by Social Security? So in order to answer that question, I'll have to make sure we're all on the same page and understand it. Social Security is a particular kind of tax system in the United States. It is similar to what other countries do in a number of ways and a little bit different in others. The important thing to know is that here's how it works. The government takes out of your salary a certain percentage of it, 6-point-something%. And it requires your employer to match that sum equally, dollar for dollar. And the money that taken from your salary, plus the money contributed by your employer, goes to the Social Security system, where they keep it and invest it to build up a sum of money that they can give you when you retire. So it is your money and your employer's contribution matching that provide the funds that enable you at age 65, 6, or 7, whenever you choose to take your retirement, it enables the government to have the money to send you your Social Security check every month for the rest of your life. This was the law passed during the Great Depression almost 100 years ago, and it had a simple, direct, honest function. We were not going to say to the American people anymore that you give a lifetime of work in your job, in your home, raising children, keeping house, earning the income outside the home. Whatever you do, you're not going to reach the age of 65, which was the basic age they used back then, and then we kind of throw you in the garbage. We don't care. You're on your own. People were not paid enough to accumulate much of a nest egg, so what were they going to live on? And most poor people were old people, and most old people were poor people. And if they weren't poor, it was because they were leaning on their children's families, which put extra burden on them. And so it was enormously popular to create, instead of that, a government-organized system that would raise money from working people, invest it, build it up, and make it available to pay out to them when they retire. But rich people didn't want that. They didn't need it. They were rich. They had plenty of money. They had it when they were young, they had it when they were middle-aged, and they had it available when they retired, if they worked at all, which for rich people is a choice, not a necessity. And so they arranged not only to fight against Social Security. This was an idea that was much older than the 1930s when that law was passed. The first Social Security system of this was passed in Germany in the 1870s, over half a century earlier. But it had been fought in the United States. By whom? By the business community, which didn't want it, didn't want to pay for people's future. If you couldn't work and make money for them on the job, they didn't care what happened to you. They certainly didn't want to pay for your retirement when you weren't working. So they fought it. And when they finally were defeated by mass movement from below demanding that, and when, in the midst of the Great Depression, that's when the demand became unavoidable. Here's what the rich people got. Okay, you can take 6% of the salary and match it by the employer, but only up to the first X dollars. After that, the tax doesn't apply. So today, because it's been raised over time, you have to pay Social Security up to the first $168,000 that you earn. Now, of course, for most people, that's the vast majority of Americans. It's a relatively tiny group that earn more than $168,000. But notice, if you earn more than $168,000 a year, every dollar above $168,000, you don't have any 6% taken from you, and your employer doesn't have to match it. In other words, by putting a cap of any size, but particularly one at 168, all of the people who earn millions of dollars a year basically don't have a significant Social Security tax to pay. It is a clear, obvious, naked discrimination in favor of the rich and against everybody else. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Let me drive home one or two more points about this so you get the picture. The Social Security tax is only levied for your wage and salary income. If you earn interest, because you have a lot of money, you lend it out, you get interest, there is no Social Security tax on interest. There is no Social Security tax on dividends, what you get if you own stocks. There is no Social Security tax on capital gains if you buy stocks at one price and sell them at a higher one. In other words, not only do we not tax rich people's income above $168,000, but we don't tax any of the income, not even the first buck that they earn on interest, capital gains, or dividends. Who owns the shares and who lends the money that earns interest, capital gains, and dividends? You guessed it, the richest people amongst us. Social Security exempts them, saves them. We couldn't get a proper system. What would a proper system look like? Well, either you're going to take care of your elderly after a lifetime of work, or you're not. If you're going to do that, then everybody kicks in according to their ability to pay, just like we organized the income tax. But we didn't do that for Social Security. The rich fought hard enough that they didn't get that to be a general obligation of the government. Instead, they fixed it so that only the middle and lower income people would actually have to pay for it. For the rich, they were let off the hook. So the next time you hear the Social Security system will be out of money in the year 2033, I believe that's the latest number from the Congressional Budget Office, that's not true. It's only going to run out of money in 2033 if you don't change the law, if you don't change the rules of Social Security. But if you made the deduction for Social Security come out of interest income, capital gain income, dividend income from the rich, then the Social Security system would be funded forever. And if you made people who earn millions pay the same percentage that poor people pay on their first 10 grand, then likewise the money would be plenty for Social Security through the lifetimes of everybody listening and watching this program right now. Don't be fooled. It's a system rigged, and you know who it's rigged for, and you know who it's rigged against. All we've just done is given you a few more details. All right, now we're going to turn, I want to thank my assistants, to questions selected from those that are coming in right now as we talk. This one comes from Eric. What is your opinion, Eric says, regarding the private equity firms such as BlackRock and Vanguard and the geopolitical impact they have on the global economy and the working class? Well, here again, a moment of background. BlackRock and Vanguard, you need to understand, are funds in which wealthy people, major institutions, very big corporations, they give their money to firms like BlackRock and Vanguard, and their task is to invest that money. Whatever the company may be doing, making hamburgers, or whatever the individual family may be doing, nothing at all, but if they have a lot of money, they turn that over to BlackRock, and BlackRock goes around the world, invests it for people, and takes, of course, a healthy share for doing so. They are specialists in investment. They're often called investment companies, sometimes fancier name, private equity companies, family firms, lots of names, but it's basically always the same thing. The importance of BlackRock and Vanguard is that they're the ones who have become the supergiants among investment firms, the monsters. You know, they are the people who distribute, because they have it, trillions of dollars, not millions and billions, trillions of dollars. So they buy shares of companies they think are going to go up, and they have the time and the expertise and the size of the staffs to do the research and invest in this company, not that one. They own such enormous amounts of shares that they become, and here's what Eric is after, they become more than a shareholder. They're so big that if they ever decided to sell the shares of a company, then the market would suddenly be flooded with what BlackRock or Vanguard want to sell, and it would be a signal to everybody, uh-oh, the big guys who know what's going on are selling shares. We, the rest of us watching, we better do it too. They know something we don't. Let's be like them. Why is that important? Because every company that has shares owned by BlackRock is now going to have to take seriously whatever BlackRock says. That's right. BlackRock and Vanguard, which may be names that mean nothing to you, now must mean something to you because they sit at the top of the capitalist system. They own shares globally. They own vast tracts of housing in the world. One of the biggest landlords in the city of Berlin, Germany, I recently discovered, is a company like this, an American company. Imagine what is going on inside Berlin as people discover that the fortunes of their real estate industry, the value of their apartment, the chance for their children to ever get an apartment is basically controlled in New York at the headquarters of BlackRock, etc., etc. So what these companies are is the coming together of huge amounts of money. Think of the richest institutions, the richest companies, the richest universities, the richest, name it, pooling their wealth into the hands of a literal handful of companies who now have the power of all that money to invest it or not, to move it over here, take it away from there, to move it into Europe, out of Europe, into China, out of China. Their power is beyond anything a government has, and you may not even know their name. And one of the things they do is they make sure that if in any part of the world the working class were to be successful and push up their wages, they'll pull their money out of there and move it to a place where their wages are lower, making it harder for the wage rise to be sustained where workers have won it. So think of it this way, it's a coming together of the rich and the powerful, the capitalist class, so that they can concentratedly use their wealth to hold on to it, to become richer still. And that, in the end, is one of the reasons why, if you look at the statistics of the last 40 years, that's exactly what's happened. The rich have gotten much richer, and the rest of us haven't. And it's partly because of the peculiar power of the enormous investable funds gathered into the hands of entities like BlackRock and Vanguard, and literally a handful of others. The next question comes from Zach. Silly, says Zach, but it's not. But I'd really like to know what some of Professor Wolff's favorite movies are. Wow, okay. I want to open up questions for more people, so I'm not going to mention many, but I'm going to pick one that I found particularly interesting recently, and I suspect many of you did too, because of the prizes that the film has won and so on, and that is Oppenheimer. I'm really interested in Oppenheimer because of the window onto American history that movie opened. By the way, it didn't open it as much as it could have. It didn't open it as much as it should have, but it opened it, and I'm grateful for that. And what is it about that movie I liked? The movie was sensitive in showing that a man, Robert Oppenheimer, who's credited with a disproportionate amount of the research, the thinking, the science needed to produce atomic energy, and in his case, the atomic bomb. There he was, doing what he felt was the best he could do for the country when it called him. The United States at that time was very afraid of the war with Germany and with Japan. Very afraid because their intelligence had taught them that the Germans and the Japanese, the enemy in World War II, were working on rocketry. Remember, the Germans sent rockets over and into London, causing enormous damage, and that they were working on atomic bombs as well, which were bigger, newer weapons than anyone had ever seen. And Oppenheimer, as well as the American military and government, knew that they were in a race and they needed to mobilize the best and the brightest brains they could. And Robert Oppenheimer was right at the top of the list. And he went to work, and long story short, as the film shows, he did it. He wasn't the only one, but he was a crucial part of doing that. But then there were the people who were already busy fighting a whole nother war, the one that hadn't even started yet. Because during World War II, I hope I don't need to remind you, but I will, the United States' ally in fighting the Germans and the Japanese was the Soviet Union. That's right. The Uncle Sam from America was arm in arm with Uncle Joe Stalin from Russia in fighting the Germans and the Japanese. And Robert Oppenheimer, as well as members of his family, were sympathetic to the Soviet Union as allies of the United States. And they had ideas that were critical of capitalism in some ways and interested in socialism in some ways. That didn't hold them back from giving their all to produce a bomb for the United States. But they didn't get back as good as they gave. They were suspected, they were hounded, they were hurt in a dozen different ways. And the film shows at least some of them. It was a window on a period of American history we should all know, if only so we don't do it again. But of course, we now live in the United States where these kinds of suspicions are dividing us and leading us to treat people in the horrible way Oppenheimer was treated, often with using the same words, the same names, the same ideas. That's, I'm sure, why the movie was made. People see that you need to look at that history because it's so relevant now. So that was an important movie for me. If we had more time, I would tell you that I was also very taken by the Barbie movie, because I thought here was a tongue-in-cheek, humorous way to poke fun at something that once was a model for what young women and young men ought to think are their social roles. That time is gone, and I'm, for one, among those happy to see it go. But Barbie made that point with sensitivity and humor. We are in a new place. It's hard to adjust, but we have to do it because the old one is nothing we want to hold on to. So yeah, like many Americans, Barbie and Oppenheimer were favorite films. The next question comes from Mohammed, and he asks, in a world growing more fascist and the left having no real power at all, with democracy not existent, what hope remains, and how can the future be actually changed to the better realistically? Well, Mohammed, first of all, I take my hat off to you. This is a question that is everywhere around the world, being asked by millions of people, almost in the exact same words that you're using. And I want to congratulate you for formulating it, for being aware that that is the urgent question. So let me answer as I often do, and I hope this isn't frustrating for you to hear. But I'm going to answer you with history. What history teaches us is that every single system that has existed has also passed out of existence, whether it's the ancient village, whether it's prehistoric tribal movements, whether it's slavery or feudalism or today's capitalism. These are systems that arise, they are systems that evolve over time, and then they decline and die and give way to another system. European capitalism came out of feudalism. The feudalism of the medieval ages in Europe came out of the slavery of the Roman Empire, and so on. So the first thing to remember is that change is the one permanent feature of the world we live in and always has been. So while you may be happy or sad about the way things are now, change is what you can count on. That doesn't tell us what kind of change or in what direction, and you use the word fascist, so let's be clear, one of the places change can go is in a fascistic direction. And there are places around the world where that is going on, and you can see it, especially if you're honest enough to look at what's going on rather than drinking too much or spending too much time on social media, etc., etc. So yeah, it could go in that direction. But again, history teaches us it can also go in another direction. Here's how I see a more focused answer to your question. I think the capitalist system that we were all born into, that we have all lived our lives in, because it's the dominant, prevalent system in the world today. That system is now going through two crucial changes that are affecting all of us. Number one, the center of gravity, the dynamic, growing, explosive capitalism, is no longer the one we see in Western Europe or North America or Japan. That's where capitalism once was the dynamic, growing system. But the dynamic, growing system has moved. It's left Western Europe, North America, and Japan. And we all know where it's gone. China, India, Brazil, those places. We shouldn't be surprised. Capitalism has always moved. It began in New England. There's very little of it left in New England. It then moved to the Midwest. Now the Midwest is known as the Rust Belt. Then it moved to the Southwest. Then it moved to the South. It's a system that moves. We're watching our businesses leave and go to Canada in the north and Mexico in the south. Capitalism moves. But that movement of the dynamic, growing sectors out of the United States has a second quality. It means, and there's no way to evade this, it means that American capitalism is now in decline. It had 100 years of growing, a ride up that took many people, not all, but many with it. It can't do it anymore. And that is an excruciatingly difficult experience. You'll learn that if you study how the Romans dealt with the decline of their empire, how the Greeks did, how the Persians did, how the Ottomans did, how all of the empires, more recently the British Empire, whose country is still not quite able to face what it is. It's not an empire that rules the world. It's a small country off the coast of Europe. And they can have coronations of kings and mammoth burials of queens, but it doesn't bring back what the king and the queen of England once meant. Whereas now, it's mostly about tabloid stories. We are living through the decline of the empire. That's why so many of us are upset. Whether we go in a fascistic direction, MAGA, we're going to bring it all back, a delusion, or we look for new ways of organizing society, new ways to go beyond a capitalism so the decline of the capitalism doesn't take us down with it. That's what you're feeling. And I think, if I dare say so, don't worry. Join the fight. Push. The possibilities of a turn to the left are right around the corner. It's up to whether we make that happen or we don't. Change is going to happen. It's only a question of which direction that change will go. Next question comes from Justin. Please explain how the labor force can combat the rise of artificial intelligence, maintain leverage, and protect their livelihood. Well, that's really the same answer as I just gave to Mohammed's question, slightly adjusted. Artificial intelligence is a new technological breakthrough. I mean it no disrespect by saying that it reminds me of modern chemistry, of computers, robots, which it is the extension of the invention of the loom, of the Industrial Revolution, of ocean shipping, of steel and iron manufacture. All of those breakthroughs, including artificial intelligence, created an opportunity by asking the question, forcing the question, how are we going to use this new technology, this new chemistry, this new physics, this new computer, whatever? And in capitalism, there are always two ways. One is how the capitalist wants to use the technology. And it should come to you as no surprise that for the capitalists, for the owners and operators of business, what artificial intelligence represents is an opportunity to make more profits. And here's how it works. I'm going to give you a simple example. You have 100 workers and they're making something in your factory or your office or your store. It doesn't matter. And if you now buy some artificial intelligence, you can have workers become twice as productive as before. In other words, here's what you can do. You can fire 50 of the workers out of the 100 you had and replace them with this artificial intelligence because it makes the remaining 50 twice as productive as they were before. So the remaining 50 can produce just as much output as required 100 before. And why is that exciting to the employer? Because he's got 50 people he does no longer have to pay wages to. The money he would have paid in wages to those workers, he can keep for himself. And so his profit in that business will be much higher. And so he will use the artificial intelligence and replace the workers, making the extra profit. And he has no requirement in our capitalist system to worry about what happens to those 50 other workers. They're not his concern. They're not his responsibility. They have to go off and fend for themselves, which they either will or they won't. But he doesn't need to care, and he doesn't need to spend a penny dealing with it. But now suppose we ask ourselves the question, what else could be done with artificial intelligence? That's like asking, what other direction could this new technology allow us to go in other than making more profit for the employer? Look, if they use AI the way they're going to use, to drive a truck without a driver, to run the taxi without a taxi driver, you see what's happening, using the AI, laying off the workers. But now here come the workers with another idea. Just like I suggested that Mohammed, the previous questioner, think about coming up with other directions and other ideas. Here's one. We welcome artificial intelligence, but we're not going to use it the way that capitalists do. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to say, this makes it possible for workers to be twice as productive as they were. But we're not going to fire 50 out of the 100, because that's not who we are. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to cut the working day from 8 hours to 4 hours for everybody, for all 100. We're going to give them the same wage we gave them before, but we're only going to ask them to work half as much time. The rest of the day, the other 4 hours of every 8-hour day, will now be liberated. They will be free to develop relationships with their children. They can indulge their interest in sports, in arts, whatever. AI will have made a transformation in the life of the working class by reducing the hours of labor without reducing the income 1 nickel. This would be spectacular. Does it improve the profits for the employer? No. No, the beneficiary of the AI are the working class. And let's remember, employers are 3% of the population, of the workers are the rest. So if you want to use a new technology for the best benefit for the most people in a democratic way, that's a direction you ought to go. We shouldn't be discussing good or bad artificial intelligence. We should be discussing the taboo topic. Why are we keeping a capitalist system that uses every technological breakthrough in a way that is good for the minority who live on profits and not good for the majority who live on labor, wages, and salaries? That's the real issue behind the distraction about AI. I don't want to read another article alarmingly telling us AI could wipe out 10 million jobs, 50 million jobs. It can. Those articles are correct. But they're written as if we face an inevitability. We don't. We could have a different economic system that didn't choose to use technological breakthroughs that way. And a little side benefit, if technological advance were used to improve the lives of the mass of people, they would never be as hostile, as suspicious, and as reticent about embracing new technology as they have become, because they know what the employer is going to do with it. And it's not going to be to help them, it's going to be to threaten them. And that's exactly what they're doing with artificial intelligence. Next question comes from Northern Nevadan. What is the definition of the rich? What income level? What assets? Well, you know, it's an ancient question. It's been asked by people for literally thousands of years. I always thought the cleverest answer I heard was, how much do you need to be rich? Enough so that you never think about it again. That's what wealth means. That you don't, when you spend money on a vehicle, on a home, on a vacation, what it costs doesn't interest you. You wouldn't even know. You don't pay attention. You have one of your servants go out and get you a resort of the sort you're interested in visiting, on the beach, in the mountains, whatever. And you have a lovely car, or 2 or 6. In other words, to be wealthy is to be free of the constraint of money. If you're not free, if you're worried, then you are not rich. Even if you have a lot of money, you may be the product of a society that is so obsessed with money that even when you have enough, you can't grasp that that's the reality. So you keep on acting as though you didn't have the luxury of not caring about it. But if you really want numbers, here's what you would have to have. Number 1, enough assets, wealth, generating you income so that whether or not you go to work is a completely separate decision. You only go to work if the work itself satisfies you, attracts you, is meaningful for you. You don't go to work to earn money. You don't need to. Your assets, what you own, are generating more money than you can spend. Jeffrey Bezos has somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $200 billion last time I looked. Elon Musk, people like that. You know what that does? If you lend that to the United States government, perhaps the safest investment you can make, you'll earn 3 or 4%. Well, if you have $100 billion, 3 or 4% means you're earning 3 to 4 billion a year doing nothing. You don't have to work. You don't have to get up in the morning. You don't have to do anything. And you're earning millions a day if your annual income is several billion a year. So you want assets that mean that you don't have to worry about whether you work or not, how often you work, when you work. You don't worry about taking a vacation because you are on perpetual vacation. Your life is a vacation punctuated by occasional work if it's interesting to you or not. Mr. Trump inherited from his father real estate. Those are assets. They generate income, rent. He doesn't have to work. He can run for president. For how long? Forever. What difference does it make? He's a billionaire. That's what that means. So if you want real wealth, the first thing is you must have assets generating an income that make the whole world of work irrelevant to you. If you don't have that, you're not rich, because then you have to worry. For example, keep your job. Get a job. The vast majority of people are worried about getting a job and keeping a job and how much income the job will generate for them. If you worry about those things, you're not wealthy. Or you're one of those people who is wealthy but is so obsessed by the way this system works for most people that even though they have the wealth, they can't break free. Daniel sends us a question. What is the difference between the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury? How are they similar and how do they differ? Okay. The U.S. Treasury is part of the executive branch of the United States. There's a Secretary of the Treasury who is appointed by the President and ratified by the Senate, and it's the job of the Treasury to manage the affairs of the federal government. And basically what that means is collect the taxes that we all have to pay and spend the money that the government raises in taxes, and also to borrow. If the government spends more than it raises in taxes, well, then it has to borrow the money. The U.S. Treasury is in charge of taxing, spending, and borrowing on behalf of the federal government in Washington, D.C. The Federal Reserve does not tax, and the Federal Reserve does not spend, and the Federal Reserve basically doesn't borrow either. What is the Federal Reserve? It is not under the president. It is a kind of peculiar, we call it semi-independent part of the government. So yes, it's in the government, but no, not altogether, because the banking system, the private banks of the United States, have an official position in relationship to the Federal Reserve. No comparable private industry has an official position in the U.S. Treasury. What is the job of the Federal Reserve? Quite different. The job of the Federal Reserve is to manage the monetary system of the United States. The Federal Reserve decides how much money should be in circulation, and they can raise and lower the quantity of money available. Very important job. The Treasury doesn't do that. The Federal Reserve does it. And as part of that work, the Federal Reserve shapes interest rates. They can raise them, they can lower them. The Treasury does not do that. That's a job of the Federal Reserve. So they work together, they have to coordinate. They often do, sometimes they disagree, but they have different functions. The private sector was afraid in the United States of giving the Treasury the power over the money. Why? They were terribly afraid that one president or another would abuse the right and the power to print money to help his political career, to save his government, to avoid impeachment or who knows what. Why? Because history is full of leaders, kings, queens, emperors, czars, who printed money in order to solve their problems, and that made their money worthless often. And the fear was that that might happen. So in the United States, they set up a separate part of the government. Other countries did equivalent things to keep that money power out of the direct hands of the people running the government. So the president can't dictate what happens. The Secretary of the Treasury, who works under the president, can't do that. So it's a way of separating in the hopes that things work out. Now, typically, the head of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Powell these days, and the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen these days, meet often, coordinate, try to agree on their goals and work together. But it doesn't always work. And the logic of keeping them separate is what I hope I've made clear. Why are some currencies stronger than others? The US dollar has been the dominant currency, but other countries' currencies are starting to gain more strength. Why? Well, through history, currency is a tricky business. It's just another word for money. And remember what money is. Let me give you an example you'll all understand. At the end of the week, in most of cases, you will get paid for the work you do. You will be paid in money. You might be handed an envelope with $20 bills in it, or you might be handed a check that you can cash at your bank or at a check cashing place, and then they will give you money or currency. And then you take that currency and you put it in your wallet. And you do that because you are planning to use that currency. Maybe not right away, maybe later today or tomorrow or next week or next month, or maybe next year, which means you're going to hold the currency. Now, in the back of your mind, even if you don't think this way, you ought to. In the back of your mind, there is the question, how can I be sure that the money I got for working will enable me to buy the beer, the pizza, the haircut that I need to live? I trust, whether you're aware of it or not, you're doing this. I'm trusting that this currency will be accepted by the barber for my haircut and by the clerk at the grocery store for the milk and eggs and cheese that I want to buy. Well, what determines whether the gas station or the barber or the grocery clerk will accept your money? Well, the answer is it's the same issue. They want to know whether if they take your money and give you a quart of milk, the money you're giving them will be worth what they will need to spend it on. So currency is valuable only if and when the people using it trust it, believe in it, expect something of it, namely that it will hold its value. And if you can show a person that the currency they're accepting or that they already have in their wallet may not be accepted, you're going to watch a person unload that currency as fast as he can, because it's not worth anything then. It's just a funny little piece of paper with a picture of some politician on it, and you can use it in the bathroom in ways I'm not going to discuss with you, but that's about it. It's a piece of paper. So what makes a currency valuable is it trustworthy? Well, then you won't be surprised to learn that currencies are as valuable as whoever is producing that currency is trusted. After World War II was over, all the major countries in the world at that time were destroyed, excepting the United States. Japan was destroyed. Russia was destroyed. Germany, Britain, France, Italy, I could go on. All the major countries in the world were destroyed, excepting the United States. In 1945, the United States was stronger than it had been going into the war. Everybody else was weaker. So the one currency that everybody believed was trustworthy was the one backed by the full faith and credit, it's called, of the United States. And the dollar became the currency everybody wanted. In many parts of the world, you couldn't even use the local currency. I remember my relatives telling me in France, you couldn't use the French franc, which was the government's currency, because people were worried about their own government, but if you paid them in a dollar, you got what you were looking for. The dollar circulated in France as the currency that people trusted. So here's what's happening. As you recall from a few minutes ago, if capitalism in the United States is declining, which is what many, many people, myself included, have now seen is the case, well, then it is only logical and normal and natural, and it's the historical pattern that trust in the dollar is going down too. Around the world, people who hold large amounts of money don't want it to be all in dollars anymore, because they don't know what a declining United States is going to be doing with that dollar. And so it's safer to get rid, not all of your dollars right away, but a chunk of them, and buy the currency of others that are coming up, like the People's Republic of China. And even if you don't have 100% confidence in them, it's better to spread your risk than put all your eggs, all your currency eggs, in one basket. So yeah, the dollar is shrinking. The BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the additional 5 or 6 that joined recently, they are having important discussions about replacing the dollar in their holdings by some new currency they're going to develop that is a kind of basket of their currencies. Not one or the other, but kind of all of them in certain proportions that they would work out. But that's just one of many experiments of where to go. But the direction of change, unambiguous. Yeah, the dollar, like everything else about American capitalism, is in decline. And that is probably the most important reality, even if neither presidential candidate dares say so. Even if the pundits don't talk about it, that's the context within which all of this is unfolding. Unfortunately, friends, we have run out of time. Thank you immensely for joining us in this week's session of Ask Prof Wolff Live. We anticipate connecting with you in 2 weeks. We will be into April at that time. Our newsletter and other public relations will let you know all about it. And please understand, we look forward to you joining with us again when we do this again. Thank you, and good night.